Welcome to WCS Talks Unplugged, where we bring you real stories, real solutions for the mind and the planet. This podcast is brought to you by Women in Clean Tech and Sustainability, a global community elevating women's leadership, accelerating climate solutions, and championing a more equitable, clean economy. Every episode, we sit down with the thinkers, builders, and innovators, redefining what climate leadership looks like and doing it with purpose and heart. So settle in, take a breath, and get ready for an honest, insightful conversation that just might spark your next idea, shift your perspective, or inspire your own climate journey. Let's get unplugged. Hello, and welcome to WCS Talks Unplugged. I'm your host, Farah Saeed, Board Secretary for Women in Clean Tech and Sustainability and Industry Director at Frost & Sullivan. We all know the clean tech landscape is shifting, and while the demand for leaders is high, the path to the executive suite isn't always clear, especially if you feel boxed in by your current role. So today, we're talking about how to find your passion and build leadership skills outside your daily scope. Or as my guest likes to call it, finding your side hustle. Here to share her perspective is the brilliant Robin Milshtein, a former WCS board member. Welcome to the show, Robin.
Oh, thank you, Farah. It's great to be here.
Lovely to have you. Thank you for making the time. So to start off with, could you talk a little bit about how you got your start in the clean tech sector? You have an amazing journey in this space.
Absolutely. Well, my background is in engineering, and I started off squarely in engineering roles, developing high-performance materials for the clean tech sector, specifically high-temperature hydrogen fuel cells. And a few years into my career, I realized that I really thought I could bring more to the table beyond my lab work, sitting in the lab, working behind a microscope every day. And I decided to transition into a more customer-facing role in business development, eventually strategic marketing and corporate venture capital. And while I've been in the industry for 15 years, the last 5 years of my career have been squarely focused on commercial roles.
So looking back at your journey, was there a specific moment when you realized that doing your day job was no longer going to get you where you wanted to go? Can you talk a little bit about that?
I did. So, as I'm sure most folks that are early in their career realize, when you come out of school, you're accustomed to learning in class, performing well on tests, getting good grades, and that moves you forward. And I realized that while in my day job, I could perform very well based on the performance metrics that were applied to my job description, excel in trainings that were focused on the function of my role, but that there was more that I was going to need to do to really advance my career beyond just doing well in my day to day. And that occurred to me maybe 2 or 3 years into my career, when I realized that I was meeting all of the performance requirements of the job, but not feeling like I was really gaining any leadership skills that was going to move the needle for me.
I see. So you obviously have gone through a lot of different transitions in your role. Why is it so difficult for people who are early in their career to build those leadership skills?
Well, my experience was specific to engineering, since I was in an engineering role, but I think a lot of early career folks have probably experienced the same, is that you're generally an individual contributor, and you're contributing in an area where you've built subject matter expertise, and you're typically working on specific projects. And some of the leadership skills that were required were things that I needed to grow beyond my individual contributor role. But oftentimes, you're hired for the specific role that your manager is looking for you to fill.
Mm-hmm.
And you're being evaluated based on how you perform in that role.
Mm-hmm.
And your success is being measured by how you're fulfilling in that role. So if you're taking on these other advanced projects to develop those skills, it might be challenging for you to manage expectations with your manager. So one way that I found that was very successful for me was by volunteering outside of my daily role And that's why I frame as a side hustle, because it really was trying to put in work above and beyond my 9 to 5, although I wasn't getting paid extra for that. It was volunteering, but that enabled me to build the specific skills that I was looking for without impacting my performance on my day job.
Got it. Got it. So, in preparation for this podcast, you had shared a story, a really fascinating story about how you went for your dream job, what your approach was. You were quite systematic about that. And I think our audience would love to hear your journey.
Sure, sure. So I spent the first 10 years of my career at a large multinational French corporation called Saint-Gobain. And my journey there started in research and development, moved into business development, strategic marketing, and eventually corporate venture capital. So, spoiler alert, this is the story about how I was able to transition to the corporate venture capital team. But early on in my career, again, in that mark of, probably the 2 to 3 year mark, I remember discovering that there was a corporate venture capital arm of Saint Gobain. I think it was at a company all hands meeting where they had someone from that team present. And I was very interested in learning more about it. It sounded really interesting being at the intersection of a large multinational global company and the startup ecosystem, which is very innovative and fast moving. And I'm an engineer. I love problem solving. I'm very curious. And so just naturally, I was naturally gravitating towards a role that would be at that intersection point. And I asked the woman who was leading the team in the US at that time to sit down for a coffee because I wanted to explore how I might be able to join that team, or ask her if I could build any skills that would, position me for being that team later in the future. And she was so nice, but she told me that everyone on her team had both a PhD and an MBA. And at that point, I was just finishing up my master's, which I had been working to earn while working full time. I was lucky enough that St. Gobain had a tuition reimbursement program, so they were paying for my graduate degree. And I remember just like, feeling so kind of hopeless almost that, wow, I will never be able to obtain this dream job because I just simply don't have the advanced degrees that they're looking for. But it was also very motivating for me because I thought, all right, well, this is the area that I'm really interested in. So let's see if I can get there anyway. So that led me on a multi-year marathon to try to pursue a position on the corporate venture capital team. And so I really started working on that when I was working in a business development role for one of the business units. And so the first thing that I started doing was getting involved in a startup incubator that St. Gobain funded called Greentown Labs. It's based in Somerville, Massachusetts, near Boston. It's now one of the largest clean tech incubators in the world. But back, more than 10 years ago, when at this point in time, it was much smaller. And St. Gobain was a sponsor of the incubator. And so I started attending events sponsored by St. Gobain and sponsored by other companies, and just tried to grow my network, meet staff, meet investors, partners, startups, and just try to immerse myself in the culture and ecosystem of startup world, which was very different than the culture that I experienced in my day to day at St. Gobain. And the thing that I would advise for listeners is that you really need to find out how you can add value in those types of situations. So what I tried to do was, put on my business hat during those networking sessions. And if I met someone that seemed like it could be a good match for a colleague or a business partner or for investment, I would then make that introduce that person to a business colleague so that they could start associating me with adding value to the business. And then gradually I started taking it a step further. So I organized a event that was sponsored by my company. At that time, I was in a leadership position in our women's network, and I organized a women's network event at Greentown Labs. And then I took it a step further. I started helping build out a materials library that my company was setting up to expose startups and startup founders to our materials so they could incorporate them into our products and build the case for investing in the companies. And as part of that, I held regular office hours. And I started generating leads for investments. And I started building the relationships with the corporate venture capital team. And as I mentioned, it took several years, but a position did open up on the corporate venture capital team. At that point, the woman that had been previously running that position had transitioned into another role, and it was a new individual. And I had built a relationship with him, and I went to him and said, "Hey, I'm really interested in this position. I saw it opened up. I'd love to apply." And he said, "Robin, you would be a great fit for our team."
Amazing.
No PhD, no MBA. And so how did I do that? I would say not only did I create a position where he could envision me in that role, he actually saw me doing the job. And I did it in ways that was beyond my daily scope, and it was voluntary for me. And I was obviously, like, I had to go through the interview process, and I was ultimately selected. It was a competitive process, but I kind of consider that my Mona Lisa of career moves.
Of course. Yeah, no, that's a really fascinating and very inspiring story. Hats off to you for being so bold. I think the lesson really is that sitting behind your desk and just crying over what could be is not going to help you anywhere. You have to be proactive, think outside the box, go out there and just be in this discovery mode, challenge yourself essentially, right?
Absolutely.
To new opportunities. One question that I had for you, what inspired you to take this bold move? And also, as you were going through this, so to speak, exercise, did you have an end goal in mind, or were you in it for just the enjoyment of it?
Well, my end goal was to ultimately be
Mm-hmm.
spending my time every day in a role that I loved, that I felt like it was fulfilling for me, and that it was helping me grow in the direction that I wanted my career to grow in. One of the reasons why I loved that intersection point was because I was able to leverage my technical skills and my technical brain that I had already worked so hard to develop. I was building out my new skills in the investment world. And then the startups and the innovation ecosystem has just always been, like, very appealing for me. I love identifying problems that you can solve and building a business case around it. And I think, I really enjoy in my day job, I'm a senior director of business development. And on the sales side, that's something I really enjoy with my customers, is trying to help them build solutions and solve problems. So that was really interesting for me. But I think that the relationship piece is also something that shouldn't be underestimated. And that is something that I do think differentiates me from a lot of the stereotypical, maybe introverted engineer personalities, that folks might think about. And so the ability to not only bring the technical competency, but also the soft skills is very important for leadership.
Mm-hmm.
And finding a way to build out those soft relationship skills is very important.
Mm-hmm. Not to be too catty or anything like that, but what happened to that person who was trying to dissuade you from seeking a position?
Well, I don't want to name her in case she listens to this podcast.
Yeah.
She's a very talented and successful person, and I think she was just trying to be transparent with me,
Sure.
and it motivated me, right, and it got me where I needed to be. But
Right, right. Absolutely. It's so interesting. That's brilliant. Are you looking to align your brand with climate innovation and be seen by the people driving it? Women in Clean Tech and Sustainability invites you to sponsor our Climate Week events, where founders, investors, policymakers, and industry leaders come together to shape the future of the clean economy all across the globe. Gain visibility across event marketing, social media, newsletters, and on-the-ground experiences, and extend your impact year-round through our growing community and digital platforms. Learn more about sponsorship opportunities at womenInCleanTechSustainability.org. The future of climate innovation is built through community, and your brand can be part of it. So what kind of resources, you talked a little bit about, volunteering, how important volunteering was for you in terms of developing those leadership skills, in terms of developing those problem-solving skills outside of your comfort zone, so to speak. But what kind of resources should our listeners take advantage of. Can you talk a little bit about what your recommendations would be for our listeners who are looking to pivot into, say, a leadership role?
Sure. So there's a few ways or a couple avenues that I would recommend. And as you mentioned, all of our listeners are going to come to listen to this podcast with their own unique experiences at different points in their career with different goals. And for some, they might be listening to these strategies and think about how they could apply them themselves. For others, maybe they manage employees or, they have direct reports and they want to be able to provide some strategies for their direct reports. Or perhaps they're building out their own business and they're trying to, develop relationships in their community. So the lens with which we use to analyze this would change. But I think external partnerships like the Startup Incubator is a great option. Additionally, if you have relationships with universities, that could be a great avenue, or with local nonprofits in your community. For me, one of the most impactful voluntary roles that I had was with an employee resource group. And I recognize that, if you're not in a large company, you may not have access to such a resource at your company. But you could create your own informal group, or you could look externally to other organizations like WCS, for example. And so for me, at the organization that I worked with, Saint Gobain, they had a women's network. And over maybe about the course of 8 years, my volunteer role evolved with the women's network. I started out volunteering as an individual contributor, eventually leading a hub that was at the research center where I worked, and then eventually being nominated and elected to a national steering committee of 12 individuals that were responsible for guiding the strategy for North America. We had about 1,000 members across over 150 sites in North America. So for me, the work that I did with the Women's Network allowed me to build out my skills in kind of 3 unique areas. The first being influencing without authority. So when I was in an individual contributor role, I didn't have an opportunity to manage large groups. I was managing a project by project. And while I did pull in resources for specific projects, those folks weren't directly reporting to me. And so influencing without authority was a way I could build those skills through leading the hub, leading groups of volunteers. While all those volunteers were rallying around a specific set of values and a specific mission, it's not always easy to organize volunteers that have maybe some differing ideas or opinions of how to reach a specific endpoint goal.
Mm-hmm.
The second area where I was able to build out my skills was in tactical operations. So these are things like managing my own budget, event planning, hosting guest speakers, planning external STEM outreach events in our community, and then lastly, change management. So managing the Women's Network through the COVID pandemic was something that I never thought that I would have found myself in that situation.
Right.
And it was taking the organization that was primarily based on in-person relationships virtual. And then how did we support our hub leaders through that? How did we give them resources to help their employees? And so that was extremely valuable as well. And then the third area is HR support. And this was the area that I think was most beneficial for me. At that time, Saint Gobain had 13% women across the organization globally. In North America, it was a bit higher, but the company had ambitious goals for increasing the number of women because they believed that companies that are more diverse are more innovative, and they were an innovative leader in their sectors that they served. And I absolutely subscribe to that belief as well. I felt like as a leader in the Women's Network, I had a role for helping the organization achieve those goals. And I was the business liaison between our business unit sponsor of our employee research group. And we partnered with an external organization called SWE, the Society of Women Engineers. And I know that they've partnered on some events with WCS in the past.
Correct. Yeah.
And we decided that the best way to partner with SWE was by participating at their annual National Career Fair, at their annual conference. And this conference is the largest conference for women in the world. Typically over 20,000 women attend, and there's a very large career fair. And so I started by helping with recruiting at the booth at the career fair, recruiting for not only engineering positions, but for positions across all functions, developing relationships with hiring managers, and getting exposure to the candidates, reading resumes, seeing how those women presented themselves, how effectively they communicated. And that was all training for me to think about how I could improve my own skills. And then in addition to the recruiting and interviewing, we also wanted to be a thought leader. And we used our platform in SWE to do that. And so I attended the SWE conference for I think about 6 years in a row. And the 2018 year, we submitted a panel that was accepted. And my role was submitting the panel, gathering the panelists, and then I was the moderator for the panel session. We had about 200 collegiate attendees. And the topic was thinking beyond an engineering degree. So I had 4 senior women from different functions that were not in engineering, but they all had engineering degrees. So the idea was to give the audience members that were still in college, looking to join the workforce, ideas for say, okay, I have this engineering degree. How can I apply that in the real world? And oftentimes, I think that we put too much pressure on
Finding the perfect job in the beginning.
exactly to
Mhm.
define what they're going to do forever. How do they
Right.
possibly know what they're going to do forever?
Exactly.
And so it was a very successful panel, and we were absolutely flooded with an influx of requests and applicants. And I was really proud of that. And it was an opportunity for me to moderate a panel for 200 attendees and develop relationships with senior women in my organization. And so I would encourage listeners to try to seek out those opportunities.
Right.
That
Not shy away from them for
Mhm.
sure. Yeah, that's given the uncertainty that we have, or given the uncertainty that is being portrayed in the media today, and in our industry around the influx of AI and its impact. At the moment in the tech world, you have a set of people who had thought that they were getting their dream education, computer engineering and whatnot. And now those entry level jobs are being substituted by AI. With that in mind, how important is it to remain agile, and how's that played in your life?
Sure. Well, I think it's incredibly important. I think that listeners should try to build skills around agility and understanding change. And they should try to anticipate that. And also, I would say, try to think about how you can make yourself more valuable beyond your daily scope, which really fits in very well with this topic that we're talking about.
Mhm.
And yeah, I can give a little bit of insight, at least from my own career. So early on, you excel within your organization by doing well in your day-to-day job. And so a woman, one of my all-time favorite speakers, her name's Carla Harris. She's at Morgan Stanley, and she has published a few books and has given a lot of different talks. And one of my favorite kind of concepts that she talks about is this transition from performance currency to relationship currency in the way that it helps your career advancement. So early in your career, performance currency is the way that you're going to be recognized and the way that you're going to excel. So performance currency is the value for that is derived by doing what's asked of you and a little bit extra. So you show up, you do your job, ideally better than what your manager expects, you'll be recognized and you'll advance. But at a certain point, the value of your performance currency decreases because it's just expected that everyone at your level will be performing up to a certain standard. And it's just table stakes.
Mhm.
And there's this inflection point where relationship currency becomes the most valuable currency. And relationship currency is the value that you invest in the relationships around you. And in order to advance further, it's the relationship currency that's going to help you get promoted and advance into senior levels. And so I can't say for sure about the impact of AI, but I'm absolutely certain that building strong relationships will only help you in your career, not only inside your organization, but outside your organization as well. And it's very, very important. And that is something that I underestimated early on. But now that I have somehow found myself as a mid-career individual, I'm not sure how that happened. That is my piece of advice: is that you really need to invest in those relationships.
Absolutely. I think this is definitely a powerful lesson for our audience to take in. This has been absolutely a powerful conversation. I think one of the key takeaways that I'm getting from this is how important it is to build those leadership skills beyond your daily scope. and to go after opportunities that are presented to you, right? So we also hear about, or some people would talk about, this is just too much. Feeling the burnout, right? In terms of pursuing, and can become a bit overwhelming too. So how did you overcome that? I mean, or was that never a factor in your life?
Oh, I think there are certain periods of time where you'll be overloaded with work, but I don't know if I have a specific formula for success on that. But I think trying to differentiate between the things that are kind of interesting and the things that are important, and try to focus on the things that are very important for you. And while there may be things that are interesting, you might want to deprioritize the things that are interesting and prioritize the things that are important.
Got it.
And
Got it.
just try to recognize that it's not possible to do everything.
At the same time.
Yes.
Sure. Absolutely. That makes perfect sense to me. So you were part of Women in Clean Tech Sustainability Board, but you have continued on your relationship with WCS. You're now a mentor. Can you talk a little bit about the importance of Women in Clean Tech and Sustainability, and what kind of impact it's had on your life, in your journey?
Yes, I cannot say enough great things about the organization. I learned about WCS after relocating to California from the East Coast, and I was looking to build my personal network and my professional network. And I think I initially learned about WCS through seeing a post on my LinkedIn newsfeed. I think I had a mutual contact who interacted with the post, and it showed up on my newsfeed. I thought, oh, wow, this is really interesting. And I started out as a volunteer, and then there was a open position on the membership committee, and I served on the board and as one of the board members on the membership committee for my term. And now, as you mentioned, I'm a volunteer and I also serve as a mentor. And for me, I think one of the most important things that WCS has given me is the ability to give back to other women. I feel like it's an obligation for something that I just feel this deep calling that I need to help others. And I have had experiences that are valuable to share. And the mentorship program has been a really great way to formalize that with my mentees. I'm now in my third year with my third cohort. And also just having the opportunity to grow my network and then help others within my network. Having the experience of, going through school as an engineer and working for a manufacturing company, working in manufacturing plants, very few women, and then working as an investor, very few women. I just found that it's a challenge, and I want to be able to help others so that they don't have to,
pay it forward.
Yes.
No, thank you so much, Robin. This has been absolutely inspiring. Really appreciate your continued contribution. Thank you so much for your time today.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you so much for having me.
That's it for today's episode of WCS Talks Unplugged, where we share real stories, real solutions for the mind and the planet. A huge thank you to our guest for joining us and for the work she is doing to move the clean economy forward. And thank you for listening, for showing up with curiosity, hope, and a desire to make a difference. If you enjoyed this conversation, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share this episode with someone in your network who cares about climate, justice, innovation, or building a more sustainable world. This podcast is brought to you by Women in Clean Tech and Sustainability, a global community supporting the next generation of climate leaders. To learn more, become a member, or get involved, visit womenincleantechsustainability.org. Until next time, this is WCS Talks Unplugged. Stay inspired, stay engaged, and as always, stay unplugged.